Alice sat in a folding chair facing the ocean, with her toes in the sand and a spider crawling up her face. It was a shoreline wolf spider. Alice could tell by its legs as it crawled over her eye. Its feet tapped her like tiny fingers, thumbing impatiently, one after the other, as its hairy body skittered across her forehead. She wasn't scared it would bite her, but her insides shuddered at the thought it might burrow up her nose. Alice hated spiders. She didn't want any spiders anywhere near her, but there was nothing she could do about it. "Please don't go up my nose," Alice begged the spider, but not out loud. Alice wouldn't be begging anyone for anything out loud anymore. She had begged so much during the last 2 days of her life. "Please stop. Please listen to me. Please let me go." Those words had been spoken out loud at the time. Out loud to him. But he didn't listen. Oh, he had heard every word, but Alice could tell her pleas didn't work on him. She could tell by his eyes. The beach was vast and quieter now. All the sunbathers and surfers packed up their umbrellas and towels and went home before the sun got too low. Just a few people left, here and there. A woman walking her retriever along the water's edge. A pair of lovers off to the east, probably hoping everyone else, including Alice, would leave so they could be alone with the ocean and the sunset and each other. But they were just going to have to find someplace else to fuck, because Alice wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't her fault. That night at the club, she ordered a rusty nail and let her eyes dance around the room, from face to face, and let the night soak in. Bodies throbbed to the house beats. A strobe-lit blur of shiny hair and open mouths, flickers of sweat and skin. And through the chaos of it all, she saw him, a stranger, staring at her from across the room, staring directly at her through the crowds of people in the club. She remembered the thrill that shot through her body at being singled out like that. She looked away from him, waited a few seconds, and looked back. He was still staring, right at her, only at her. She thought that stare was some kind of special connection, but she knew now it wasn't. She knew now it was the stare of a predator who didn't know normal people don't stare at other people like that. It was the stare of a psychopath. But there was nothing she could do about it now. Night fell. Alice was alone on the beach. Starlight glittered on the black Atlantic waves. The moon cast a shimmering golden pathway that ran in a straight line across the water, from the other side of the earth right up to Alice. A regal carpet unrolled at her feet. She wished she could rise up from the chair and run across the soft sand to the water and step into that bright yellow pathway and run away into the night sky and into the ether, burn up in the atmosphere and end this nightmare. But the dead don't run. Alice wondered what she was wearing. Had he put her back into her own clothes? Was she sitting in this creaky, rusted metal folding beach chair wearing her favorite red dress? She couldn't tell. She couldn't see anything of her own body except at the very edge of her peripheral vision. She could see her bare knees, bruised and scuffed, resting together. She could see her forearms and hands all purple and red, which he had placed on the plastic armrests, with his own hands encased in black latex gloves. Alice had been dead by then, but she still was aware of everything happening to her. All the way from his workbench to the beach, she was aware. She remembered how her skin crawled when he carried her across the empty beach the night before, dumped her body into the chair, and positioned her just so. She remembered how her whole body wanted to lash out and kick his teeth in and bite his face off and claw his eyes out. But she couldn't move. Because the dead don't move on their own. All she could do was scream her heart out inside her head as he placed her in the chair and arranged her body like a doll. He pressed her back against the back of the chair and sat her up like she was a regular person, no different than anyone else relaxing on a beautiful beach, taking time to admire the sea. He leaned her knees together. He put her arms on the armrest. He pushed her toes into the sand. When he was satisfied with her position, he stood back for a final look at her. She could see his face. He looked very pleased with himself. He took a picture of her with one of those old-timey cameras. The flash filled her eyes, but she couldn't blink. Then he did one final awful thing to Alice before he left her there, alone on the beach to rot. He reached behind her neck to find the on switch and set the gears of his nightmarish clockwork in motion. Alice had been alive in his workroom, strapped to his workbench, held down with leather belts and chains, her throat full of blood from screaming so hard, her skin torn apart in her desperate battle against the straps. But he ignored her and hummed to himself as he worked, with a scalpel between his teeth. She had been alive when he assembled the little cogs and gears together. She had been alive when he held his clockwork device up to the light. She had no idea what the fuck it was, or what it was going to be used for. But she would. The sunrise felt warm against Alice's skin. She couldn't see very well anymore. The salt air had dried out her eyeballs to the point where they were shrinking in the sockets and trying to roll back inside her head. But she was grateful for the sun's gentle warmth. Surely today someone would discover her. Surely to fuck someone would notice something strange about the woman in the folding chair facing the ocean. Someone please notice me, Alice pleaded silently. Please listen. Please let me go. Yesterday people on the beach ignored her, but that wasn't by accident. He did this to her by design. The thing in her neck, this clockwork thing he made and implanted inside her neck. It was put there to move her head. The mechanism turned her head clockwise, 1/4 turn, and stopped. A winding of gears. Then it snapped her head back to the front, so she faced the ocean again. The movement was jarring and disturbing. It moved Alice's head with a mechanical jolt, like an old-fashioned lawn sprinkler head, but it worked. It moved her head just well enough to give the illusion that she was alive, enjoying the beach, enjoying the view. because the dead don't move on their own. If anyone had watched her long enough, they would surely have gotten the creeps. They would surely realize something was wrong with her. Because the movement was the same thing over and over again. But being normal people, they were too polite to stare at Alice too long. So nobody noticed. And they let Alice sit there, alone, out of politeness, covered in spiders, rotting in the sun. She saw him, on one of her head's rotations, through the sunburnt crinkles of the retina of her one eye left. He was there, on the beach, about 50 feet away, staring at her through the crowds of people on the sand, staring only at her, smiling. Alice filled with rage. She wanted to kill him. She wanted to rip the clockwork thing out of her throat and beat him to death with it. She wanted to stop him. Because she remembered the smell of his workshop. It reeked of old blood. She remembered the sight of other purses tossed in the corner with hers. Other pairs of white sneakers, too small to be his. And there were piles and piles of mechanical parts all around the room, assembled and waiting. He had done this before. He would do it again. How many women had he done this to? How many clockwork women were out there right now, rotting in the sun, mistaken for living, but they were dead? Alice would never know. There was nothing she could do about it. On her head's next rotation, she didn't see him. He was gone. The high afternoon sun scorched Alice's face. She sizzled and blistered as the sun's unfiltered rays lashed her exposed skin. Her eyelids shriveled up. Her lips were charred. Her nostrils were plugged up with clots of spider silk. With every rotation of her head, she felt the skin of her face slough off her bones. She didn't feel pain. She felt the crow land on her head and pluck out her eye. She felt the gush of maggots pour out of her eye socket into a wriggling pile on her lap. Alice heard screams. Finally, screams that weren't coming from inside her own head. She heard adults shrieking and children crying and eventually sirens. But even with all the uproar, Alice could still hear the ocean, the waves crashing on the shore again and again. All Alice wanted was to curl up inside the darkness inside herself and sleep. But that thing in her neck kept waking her up again and again. It would never stop. It would never let her sleep. And there was nothing she could do about it. Darkside Tales is written by Vanessa F. Penney. Produced, narrated, and edited by Roxanne Potvin.